Ciarán, thanks for taking the time. Good to see you. How are you today?
I'm good, and the sun is out in Ireland, so it's
Hey,
always a good day for us.
excellent.
And
Well,
there's a couple of kids have turned up with footballs, and they're kicking a football about, which is great to see.
that's right. I hope it lasts a long time. Thanks for taking the time here to catch us up on all things going on. We caught up a little while ago and were able to get an update on the political situation there. And in the meantime, we also spent a lot of time traveling across the country here in the States. So we have plenty to cover, lots of things to update and to dig into. I'd like to, if it's okay with you, kind of look back a little bit. When we did our last call, we discussed how things were going with the government formation with Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, creating a government, and what that means moving forward. I'd like to see if we can't spend a little bit of time looking at what progress have they made. You know, they made a ton of promises on the election trail there in November 2024. They talked a lot about how they were going to solve housing and how they were going to advance many issues. They got the government they wanted. They formulated a coalition to retain power. How have things been going in the time since?
Well, I think at one stage I could also say almost say slowly because it's taken forever. The elections were in November, of course. The government wasn't formed until the end of January.
Yeah,
There was then there was an issue in around the appointment of committee chairs, and so we're basically, I would say, well, we're in June now, so it was probably May until the thing actually got up and running properly.
yeah,
And the lack of urgency and the lack of ideas is, I would say, that the determinant factor so far in this government. That and the fact that we have the opposition parties operating together. And
yeah.
that's become a thorn for the government because they're forever trying to drive a wedge between the parties of opposition. So for people are who are new to this, and stop me if I get too much in the weeds
Sure,
and
in the
this sort
weeds
of
there.
stuff.
Yeah, I'll pause and ask questions. Yeah,
As a political nerd, maybe a political nerd and activistness. So what we have is Sinn Féin's the largest party of opposition, so it's lead party of opposition, second largest party in the Dáil, and the government is basically formed as a coalition between Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil with some independence.
yeah,
And what has effectively been happening under the leadership of Mary Lou and the leadership of the party leaders of the other opposition parties, they're beginning to act as a coherent opposition.
yeah,
And what Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael have always done is that they've always picked a smaller party of opposition and tried to fracture the opposition and draw them into government. So it hadn't succeeded. And now the two of those are in government together. And they've ran out of ideas. And as you said, some of the promises they made on issues like housing have not been delivered and won't be delivered by this
yeah,
government. And that's not me just propagandizing. This is a government that has stood over for years issues like housing, down the cutting of public services, and to put how the Dáil operates. So the Dáil, and we're talking about the government in Dublin. So
yeah,
the Dáil, how it operates and how it has been operating. So it's made up of basically two parties, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. Fine Gael have been in government from 2011, so for 14 years they have
yeah,
been in government. In 2000, and that government at the time was a coalition of Fine Gael and the Labour Party, the Irish Labour Party. In the 2016 election, the Labour Party got absolutely hammered and were held accountable because they broke all of their election promises. In 2016, Fine Gael had a minority government with the support of some independents, but what they relied on was the support of a supply and confidence agreement from the opposition party of Fianna Fáil, who were then the largest party of opposition. So
yeah.
stop me if that doesn't make sense because it's
Yeah, so
completely different from the American system
yeah, so just pause there for a
or
second,
Canadian.
and I especially appreciate the comparison to the American system. We wouldn't have a government and then an opposition. We would have a majority party and a minority party, and then it just comes down to votes. You say, okay, well, do we have enough votes to pass this bill? Can I get some people from the other side of the aisle to help support this bill? If yes, we can advance the cause. It'll go to the president's desk to sign or veto. It doesn't sound like that's what's happening in that situation.
No, and that's a significant piece. So the government is elected by the Dáil. So
Yeah,
the largest parties put together a coalition in the Dáil. So you don't actually vote for Taoiseach.
Yeah.
In the same way you would vote for president.
Yep.
So that's not that directly elected position, it's elected from the top. And as I say, that becomes that's significant when you look at issues like, so Fine Gael had a minority government from 2016 and they were supported by Fianna Fáil.
Yeah.
And then come 2020, Sinn Féin emerged as the largest party
Yeah.
in the whole of the Dáil. And the expectation would have been you would have worked with the other parties
Yeah. Form. Yeah.
to form a government. What Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael done was they came together for the first time in their history,
Work together.
form a government to work together.
Yeah.
And this goes back to the Civil War days and the establishment of the state. And their one common denominator was to maintain the status quo and keep Sinn Féin
Yeah.
out of power. So fast forward to 2025, and Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael are again back in power and excluding Sinn Féin in the government talks. And they're supported again by some independents. So Fine Gael have been in government for the last 14 years.
Yeah.
Effectively, Fianna Fáil have been in government with them from 2016 for the past 9 years.
Yeah.
And to get you how ludicrous these deals are, in both the government of 2020 and in this government, they have a thing called the revolving Taoiseach.
Yeah.
So the government term's 5 years, and the two parties split. One will be the Taoiseach, who's the leader of the government for 2 years, and the other one will be there for 3 years. There's no vote, popular vote for that, and they're just appointed.
No say.
So
yes, that is
the reason I'm giving you that context is because of the crisis we now face on housing follows that government, the governments of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael from the collapse of 2010, which was the general housing collapse, and what has happened since then and their policies. So if you follow, that's how government was formed, and these parties have been in power since the foundation of the state. They're now in power together to exclude Sinn Féin and maintain the status quo. So issues like housing are to the fore, and it's very simple. In Ireland at the minute, we have the 5th highest rate of mortgage interests in the EU.
Yeah.
House prices are registered as severely unaffordable. House prices in them, talking about the 26 counties, are over 5 times the average wage. So working families are getting priced out of that.
Yeah.
At the same time, since 2011 to present, rents have almost doubled. So that creates an unaffordability in rent.
Pressure. Yeah, exactly right.
And that has an impact. And so that has an impact in terms of cost of living.
Yeah.
Increased homelessness. We have now record homelessness. Increase in people living in unsuitable accommodation. So with families are sharing houses with children who should have moved out are moving back with their families into family homes because rents are so unaffordable. With the rise of immigration, so at the minute, or for the first time ever, there's over 100,000 Irish-born citizens in Australia.
Wow.
And you can see the immigration patterns to Britain have increased, and to Canada. And so the outworking of this policy has made a cost of living crisis, has forced a new generation into immigration, and it has an impact on public sector because you can't recruit nurses, doctors,
teachers,
guards, teachers to live in the state. So I think we have over 4,000 teachers or registered teachers who are living outside the state.
Yeah.
So, and that tracks back to the policies of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. And they, in their most recent proposals, is basically no change. In fact, they're going to fast track what they're currently doing so that there's no sign that the crisis is going to be resolved.
I think that's what I was going to ask, because there during the campaign, they made quite a lot of promises about increasing the number of homes built, increasing the number of homes that would be under some sort of control of pricing for rent. I mean, incredible promises. And in the time since, they seem to have delivered on absolutely none of those. And in fact, gone the other direction. Was that fair?
Yeah, so on the campaign trail, they would say in last year there was going to be 50,000 houses built, and they were nowhere near that. And they were told that would not be achieved, but they still put that out.
Still went out and said it, yep.
So we have this, and this is where it's dogmatic approach to housing. So it's that the market will solve these issues.
Yeah.
The market has created these issues because the market at the minute is working for landlords and developers in terms of supply. and for contractors in terms of building it, and as I say, and particularly landlords. So they have rigidly stuck into this dogmatic position, as opposed to what worked in the past.
Yeah.
So, and this is a cultural difference as well between Ireland and America.
Yeah.
And that is, there's no stigma to being brought up in public housing. There's no.
Yeah.
I was brought up in public housing.
Yeah.
Everybody I grew up with was in a state of public housing, and it was just
Yeah.
part of it. In Dublin, up until the end of the 1970s, you were guaranteed a home.
Yeah.
And that means the people who required public housing were in the public sector. Now they're all in the private sector, and they're competing against people who are working. They're competing against students for accommodation, and competing with new workers who are coming in. So instead of going back to what actually worked in the past, this government is just refuses to come off this dogmatic approach that the market will solve the whole housing crisis. Now, there's a role for the market in that, but there's people who are in the private sector who shouldn't be in the private sector. And the rents are increasing to the extent we're going to end up in a phenomenon in a couple of years' time where retirees will not be able to afford market rents. Pensions can't keep tracking. So that's the reason why, I suppose, when you hear that so much being talked about housing, that is why it is such a key issue, because it's undermining the economy, it's undermining public services, it's leading to it's leading to a generation immigrating away, and it's also leading. I also have to name this, Greg. It's also leading to a rise of the racist right. Because there's a racist right have came to this and saying the problem is new Irish or people who have immigrated or people who are seeking asylum. They didn't create this housing problem. And they're suffering just as much because they're left in appalling accommodation. You'll hear frequently on the internet people say Ireland is full. Ireland is not full. We have a government that doesn't manage the resources. And in fact, if you go back, our population is not recovered from the famine. We have plenty of land, we have plenty of opportunity, but we have a government who refuses to act on it.
That's watching from afar. It's a government that has been in place or elements of that government in place for, as you say, 9 and 16 years. I mean, that's 14 years. It's the same people who created this crisis who are promising a way out of this crisis and are not delivering what does seem to be new. And maybe you could tell us a little bit about the strength of the unified voice of the opposition as led by Mary Lou McDonald and as led by Sinn Féin. What role does the opposition play can they slow down legislation? Can they modify or amend legislation? What is the role a strong unified opposition can play in this crisis?
Well, I think there's 3 parts to that. One is by acting together, they can demonstrate and publicize the issues. So at this week, there's a motion going through the Dáil about housing, and it is a joint opposition, and it will clearly define the lines between government and opposition. So it allows for the debate to be structured. In terms, so it gets the debate out there. So that's one point. The second point is it does allow then for the opposition to act together in terms of amending legislation to bring it into lines with what is required. And that cooperation can get done. So it raises the issue, it can amend the issue, but at the end of the day, the government have the numbers to force this stuff through, and it'll be up to them. And I suppose the third piece, and for me, it's probably the most important, it demonstrates to people who are looking in that there's an alternative to Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, a viable alternative that will have their backs, that will deal with housing, which will deal with public services, will deal with the cost of living crisis. So it creates that forever in this state, it was either Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael. And then over the last 2 elections, it's been, you have no choice other than Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael in government together. This demonstrates that there is an alternative to that, and there's the ability of a coherent government without Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael.
That's right. I think when we look back at at some of his campaign promises and some of his put us back in government, put us back in power, we'll deliver. They had offered, like you had said, to build a number of houses that they have not built, to get in front of stabilizing rents that they have not delivered on. The Occupied Territories Bill was a promise they made exclusively. They said, put us back in power and we will advance the Occupied Territories Bill. Has that moved forward?
Yeah, so the Occupied Territories Bill just brings in the line Irish law with international law, and that is in occupied territories, there's a sanction should be
Yeah.
applied to. And in terms of Palestine and Israel, the
Yeah.
occupied territories bill would prevent products, and I think services as well, coming from an occupied zone
Yeah.
being dealt with in Ireland. So yeah, there was widespread support for that, and the government says they're going to do it, but it hasn't developed. And that is not just Sinn Féin's position; that's the position of all of the parties.
Yeah.
But you can see just this lack of urgency on campaign commitments, where it's on housing, where it's occupied territories bill, where it's on cost of living. So that's what the occupied territories bill. And I suppose the Irish affinity on the issue of Palestine and Israel has been the case of our own history. You know, that our
Mm-hmm.
nation was partitioned by the British,
Mm-hmm.
and that's the starting point for many people. Besides then looking at that's aside from looking at the issues of the international rule of law
Yeah.
and the international court, what's happening there. And we also know from a nation of conflict that peace is possible. And by the
Yeah.
way, the US played a tremendous role in securing peace in Ireland, and they could do the same in terms of between Palestine and Israel.
And we talked about that, I think, a couple of times. That's how the courage and bravery it requires is there for everyone. We can use the success of the Irish model around the world, and we hope that advances. So again, the look at kind of the through line here between the last video and this one here of seeing the role the government plays, understanding how the government's formulated, and then their dedication to the status quo, their refusal to advance any solutions on behalf of the Irish people, instead on behalf of landlords and folks who are exploiting the market to get richer. It's good to see a unified opposition and good to see Mary Lou lead. And it's really important for us to understand kind of the role each of those characters and actors and bodies play. And as you describing, structuring the debate, amending legislation, and providing a clear alternative. It doesn't have to be this way. It's not as though we're out of ideas or resources. We have good ideas and we have the resources. When you put folks like Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael in charge, the outcomes are predictable, and they're like we see with the
Yeah, and
opposition, you know.
that's not just about the crisis of today on issues like housing
Yeah.
and a generation who are leaving for Australia, Britain, and Canada. Um, it's also just about the future of the state or the future
Yeah.
of Ireland. So they refuse to engage in the Irish unity discussion, which is
Yep.
alive across Ireland, and the potentials there, and the Good Friday Agreement provides a pathway, and also the Irish Constitution
Yeah.
says that Irish unity is the will of the Irish people, and the government is refusing that because it's solely based on, I don't know, it's not quite just circling the wagons, but it's about, as you say, maintaining the status quo at
Yeah.
all costs. And the cost of that is being paid by this generation. And in terms of their ignorance and ignoring and neglect of the unity debate, it's in terms of the next generation. So
Yeah.
they're all the issues that we face. I'm of the opinion at some stage Sinn Féin will be in government,
Yep.
and we will see that dramatic change in place,
Shift. Yeah.
step change, not just about dealing with the crisis today, but also about a coherent vision for where we want Ireland to
For the
be.
future, exactly right. Yeah,
Uh,
a future. Yeah.
So yeah, I think all of those issues, and I know we get a bit in the weeds, and I've went through 4 election cycles and
Yeah.
probably 6 Taoiseachs and
Yeah.
referendums, but I think it's people need, and the difference between the American system and the Irish system.
Yeah, it's helpful to understand the postures. Yeah.
So yeah,
And you raise the unity question, and it might provide us a chance because you say, looking through the lens of the current government, they don't seem to feel the growing tide, the growing swell of engagement, curiosity, discussion at universities, at people's assemblies on the street. There is an appetite for advancing the preparation for referendums that the government seems to be deaf to, or at least not at all interested in engaging.
yeah, they're refusing to grasp the opportunity that are in front of us to
Right.
actually end partition and build a new Ireland.
Yeah.
And there's an opportunity, an opportunity cost to that, So, but
Yeah.
it comes down to a government which has no vision for the future,
Yep.
There's no ability to deal with the crisis and refuses to change position, even though they know that their policies have failed. So that's what we're against. The good news
Yeah.
is there will be a future election.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And governments come and governments go. And it's just interesting. Like one of the former leader of Fine Gael, whose party's
That's
now in
right.
government, Leah Varadkar, in Philadelphia declared that Irish unity was the political project of this generation. So
Yes.
it's not just as cut and dried as, everybody in Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil is against Irish unity or plan
Sure.
of this. But
Yep.
what we can say about their current leadership is that they're opposed to any changes to the status quo.
That's right. I think, and we'll talk next about our journey across many cities in the States here this past month or so. Talk about an appetite and a desire to engage and a curiosity for what the potential is right now. That's super exciting. And it was a question at one of the events I heard. Someone said, well, I'm not sure I understand too much about Irish politics, but if you're asking a group of people who have power to relinquish their power to create a new possible future, you're probably going to have a fight on your hands. And that's a pretty astute assessment of the situation. But I would love to talk a little bit about we journeyed and traveled to Nashville, Tennessee, to Cincinnati, Ohio, to Chicago, Illinois. And this is on the heels of following similar events in Washington, D.C. and New York, Cleveland, and Columbus, where we are really listening to the Irish diaspora, Irish nationals living in the States. What are their opinions? What are their questions? What are they wanting to know more about advancing the cause and discussing how do we best prepare for referendums? How do we best prepare for unity when we ask people to vote? How confident they're going to be? I'd love to talk a little bit about that experience. It was really enriching. It was invigorating. It feels great to spend time with activists all across the country who are constantly asking, what can I do? I want to get involved. What's the next step?
Yeah, there's always in all of the cities we go to and we do these sessions, there's always a difference. There's a different context, there's a different feel to them.
Yeah.
But there's one commonality. And that is when we explain both what the Good Friday Agreement provides in terms of a pathway, and we explain what the current politics are in terms of the level of change that's going on within the North and the potential for United Ireland. People come away engaged and enthused. And once they can see a clear pathway and they can see the opportunity that this could be realized, the room becomes very excited and animated. So I think that's the commonality between them all. And the people who are in that room always leave committed to doing extra work. So they know one of the issues will be we need an Irish government who actually plans and prepares. So the questions they ask themselves is, what can we do to do that?
Yeah.
What can we do in the States and what can we do directly with the Irish government? So those commonalities are great. And I always like the differences. So Nashville would a great event in terms of being in Nashville, but also having a look at the civil rights history and how the civil rights history deals with our own Irish civil rights history and civil rights in Derry, marches in Derry and across the north into the denial of civil rights. So it's always very invigorating to have different, not just different perspectives, I suppose different angles and experiences in this. The same in Cincinnati, where we're a very well-established Irish centre.
Yeah.
And the history that was on the walls of it. And we were talking about people against the status quo, and they had a copy of the Irish Times from the time of the Rising, a photostat of it on the wall. And if you ever read it, like, it's just incredible that the Irish Times was the establishment at the time, and they were completely opposed to what they called the Sinn Féin Rebellion. And in fact, called for the execution of some of the leaders. So
in the front page of the paper. Yeah.
So that's when you see that, and we're in a different context now, of course, but you can see how the status quo maintains itself. And then Chicago, which is always a great city to get for the Irish community to be there. And I don't know if you see over my shoulder, that's James Connolly.
Right. Yep.
And James Connolly was a labor organizer in Chicago, and there was a great statue to him in Union Park. But James Connolly, and it just struck me when we were going through, we're talking about Connolly, and James Connolly said he believed in constitutional methods in normal times and
Yep.
revolutionary methods in extraordinary times.
Yep.
So it was the second part that always resonated with me during the times of conflict. But
Sure.
it got me thinking, we are in a different situation now. And
Constitutional times. Yeah.
this is a time for constitutional actions
Yeah,
and
that's right.
constitutional change. And we have that viability there. So Connolly was all for constitutional methods
Yeah.
when the times were right for those. So those sort of things, the commonalities get me, and I like the differences of being in the different cities. But I mean, Greg, you're also in the room, and you bring it
Yeah.
the Irish American perspective to it, where I've grew up in Belfast. So what was your
Yeah.
views on it?
Well, first, before we go on, I do want to thank Vincent in Chicago, Mark in Cincinnati, and Connor in Nashville, Irish Americans, Irish nationals on the ground who really are instrumental in making those events happen in those cities. Takes a lot of people working together to bring an event like that, and I'm so grateful to each of you guys for making that work. And the Ladies Ancient Order of Hibernians, and everywhere we go, show up en masse and say we're helping out. It's quite a demonstration of volunteerism and working together. So thanks to everyone making that possible. I'd say that what is common amongst all the cities is the desire to do something, right? They want to learn and they want to understand what's the latest political update. We're so lucky to have been joined by Pat Cullen, MP for Vermont and South Tyrone, who talk about a labor leader and someone who is an organizer. Her work as the head of the largest nurses union and taking 240,000 nurses out on strike and winning. It was just such an inspiration everywhere we went when she talked about her work and path to politics. Really inspired the room every time. But it's the question of, okay, I understand now. I see the opportunity. What can I do? And it's really invigorating because these are unique events. These events are unlike most anything else we have done in the past, where a guest comes over, delivers a speech, everybody claps and feels inspired again and recommitted and moves on. These events require the participants to work in small groups and really look at their role in their community and in their city. Say, what course of action can I take? What call of action do I hear? And what seems reasonable? Is that starting? I know in Cincinnati, they were very excited about at that center there, the Irish Heritage Center. They're starting a book club. They said, look, there's a lot of us who know a great deal about this and a lot of us that don't. We are going to stand up. We're going to select a text and really dig into creating an Irish unity focused book club. This is ideal. That's very different than what's going to be happening in Chicago, but what's going to be happening in DC. Each city knows what they need. So it's that call to action that is the most exciting thing about these events. When people break down into small groups and say, well, I've heard the call. I see a clearer line on the opportunity. Now what's my role? And as you said, some folks say, well, I definitely have a clearer sense of the ways in which the Irish government are kind of stymieing progress here. What is the path from where I sit at the Irish American Heritage Center to engaging with representatives or members of the Irish government? That's a great exercise. That's a great thing to dig into, to say, well, I see it now. I didn't have a clear line on that before. Maybe I do, maybe I don't. Maybe my role is more focused on starting a study group, starting a book club, writing letters. There's another group that has been stood up in the wake of these events that is focusing on getting resolutions passed at local, city, and state levels to say, little d democracy is important. Self-representation is important. Self-determination is important. And all of these things are guaranteed by the Good Friday Agreement. It's not controversial to say we stand with and support the full implementation of the Good Friday Agreement, including the necessary preparations for referendums. So that to me is really, I love planning events and hosting events and being a part of that. But really what is the most rewarding piece and the piece that gets me most excited is hearing and seeing and feeling that spark of, oh, I have something to do here. There's work I can do once this is over, and it's clearer than ever. So that's really the best part.
Yeah. As opposed to the other two commonalities, what I'm thinking about is, for all of these sessions, we've always had to call them to a close.
Exactly.
The conversations would have continued, which is, and the other commonality is, and we've spoke about it because whenever the event's over, we come away enthused.
Yep.
With them, and the more speakers that we bring over, they come away enthused in terms of the support of America in our peace process. And so all of that's really good. I also have to say that we also had one in Toronto, or sorry, one in Montreal, and we have myself and Rose Conway Walsh TD will be in Toronto next Saturday and
Great.
one in Ottawa on the Sunday. And then, of course, we will be back on the road in the fall.
That's right. Yeah, I was going to say we don't have specifics yet to announce, but keep an ear and eye open because we will be announcing the next series of cities and dates soon for the fall. And I would encourage everybody to show up. One of my favorite parts is that there are many folks in the room, and it means so much to Ciarán and I both. We name it and talk about it. Many folks have been at this work for decades, really been at the leading edge of ensuring that this is a priority for Irish America for decades. And this is work that we're doing to help advance that cause together. Some folks are in the room who don't have that background, who don't have a very well-versed understanding of Irish politics. Everybody is welcome at these events. There's not a threshold of understanding or I have to be smart enough or experienced enough. These events in these small groups, we put together people who have been in the deep end of this work for a very long time with people who are eager to get involved. We're seeing a lot of younger folks show up, say, yeah, this is an important topic to me. I want to get involved. What do I do? It's really a wide array of activists and community members during these calls. So when you see the next round of cities announced and the dates, and you're wondering, is that for me? It is. It's exactly for you. We need more people at the table to be a part of this work.
Absolutely. And I know not the idea of your work, but I suppose if anybody's interested in hosting events, they could reach out and let us know, and we can see what's viable and what's not.
Please do. Yeah. If you are in a city saying, man, we haven't had a touch like that in a while, or we'd love to host an event like that, and you can get me at greg@friendsofsinnfein.com, and let's start the conversation and see what's possible.
Yeah.
I really appreciate that. Yeah. And thanks
And
again.
I look forward to being in Canada as well next weekend.
Yeah, it looks like they have a great run of events scheduled, and you can find information on Friends of Sinn Féin Canada's Twitter feed. They're sharing a whole bunch of stuff. We share that stuff as well. So if you're looking to get involved, if you're watching in Canada and want to participate, they too want you in the seats and to be a part of the conversation. It's really essential at this moment in history.
Absolutely.
So thank you again to our friends here in Nashville when we visited Fisk University, and in Chicago we went to the Haymarket Memorial and the James Connolly space there. In Cincinnati, Mark hosted us with a whole bunch of events and met with Supreme Court justices and elected officials. Everywhere we went, it was really quite a great trip. So thanks to everyone who made that possible, and to our donors. Just to be clear, that's possible when you donate. I don't want to make a pitch out of this, but that we are able to do these things when you guys make donations. So thanks for that as well. I just want to look at one more piece, if it's all right, with some news recently. The issues of legacy are very important to Irish America coast to coast, and it looks as though there is some developments in the Pat Finucane case. Can you give us an update on what's going on there?
Yeah, so as people know, the British government eventually says that they would hold a public inquiry into the killing of human rights solicitor Pat Finucane.
Yeah.
And again, just to show you the power of sort of the US was key about getting that implemented and keeping the Finucane campaign going. The recommendation on having a public inquiry is made by a Canadian judge, Judge Corey, way back. So that's where Canada and the US, Canada made the recommendation, the US and Canada were both crucial getting it implemented. It's taken all these years to get it. But yes, they have appointed now the chair is a guy called Gary Hickenbottom, if I can get his name right, or Hickenbottom.
Yeah.
And Nuala O'Loan, who's the former police ombudsman in the north, is on the board, and a woman called Francesca Del Misha. And so their next job will be then to work out terms of reference, I take it, for the inquiry. But yeah, it's a sign of progress on that, and I'm sure that we just need to keep an eye on the detail of how the inquiry is going to be done, what powers it's going to have, and what the terms of reference are of it. But yeah, so that was a good bit of progress. Now, put that in context, this is more than 30 years of a campaign.
Exactly right. Yeah.
And on the negative side, the British government have now indicated that they're going to appeal the judgment on the Sean Brown case to the Supreme Court. So that just stalls that family getting the truth about that killing. I know we've spoken before about that.
We have, yeah. So can you briefly, when you say terms of reference, they've appointed three names. What do they have to do?
So there's a chair, and then there's two what's called assessors. So Gary Hickenbottom is the chair of it, and the other two are the assessors. They will be putting together the plan for how the public inquiry is going to be conducted. I think there'll be issues about what witnesses are called, what powers they have to compel, what evidence they're going to get to compel, well as, and it's quite a detailed case. And by the
Yeah.
way, a lot of the stuff is already in the public domain about
Yeah.
the levels of collusion within it. The
Collusion
British
all the
Prime
way up.
Minister apologized, but then didn't explain what he apologized for.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, so there's a lot more detail to come out, and that's the reason why public inquiry is going to be crucial to it. And the issues about terms of reference and powers will always be an issue.
Is there any, you said that in the Sean Brown case, the British government decided to appeal to the Supreme Court. Is there a timeline on that? Is there any news or updates on any engagement pieces, or what's the status there?
No, so that case will just now have to run through the Supreme Court, and this has been through a number of courts,
Yeah.
a number of courts in Belfast, and this is a recommendation from the inquest. The coroner said that he could no longer, that there was so much information was being hidden, and at one stage there was 27 people indicated to be involved in this killing by intelligence. And a number of those, that don't say how many, were state agents. None of those people were ever charged or arrested in connection with it. And of course, the state agents' role have never been investigated. So it was a coroner decreed that this would require a public inquiry if it was, the collusion was to such an extent. And that's the piece that the British government are constantly appealing.
Yeah.
And this is the history of all of these cases. It's all about stall and delay and stall and delay.
Yeah. So we'll keep an eye on that, and we'll be sure to share any updates and developments on that. I thank you, Ciarán. I know it really means a lot to us all that you're able to carve out time and give us an update on all the things happening politically and through legacy cases, as well as how work is going in advancing the cause of Irish unity. It makes a great deal of difference. Thank you so much.
Oh, and it's an absolute pleasure, not just to do these, but to be on the road and be at these events and see everybody, every speaker we bring always comes away energized.
Yeah.
And they always pick up my call for the next set. So
that's
always, no one ever goes, "Don't call me again."
Please don't do it. No, that's right. And that's a testament to the turnout and Irish American activists across the country who make these events so powerful and so special. Thanks to everyone showing up and being a part of making that possible.
And thank you to Friends of Sinn Féin for making it possible, and all of your supporters.
Absolutely. It means a great deal. Thank you, Ciarán. We'll talk again soon. And in the meantime, keep an eye on the newsletters and social media, and we'll keep you in the loop. Thank you.
No worries. Thanks for everything.